Hey guys, Chris here, and I'm Ukrainian Canadian. Today is November 10th, 2023, and let's get to the news happening in Ukraine, shall we? So, this is going to be a very quick video, so let's get to it. I first want to talk about Crimea because there's really great news coming out of Chornomorsk today. The Ukrainian forces shared with us a beautiful video showing them promoting two Russian ships into submarines very quickly. Of course, I'm joking, but the Ukrainian forces utilized today or last night unmanned sea vessels, these so-called sea babies, so remote-controlled ships, kamikaze ships, and essentially they managed to destroy two Russian landing crafts in the city of Chornomorsk. And this is really, really big news because I believe that the Russians are utilizing these landing crafts to transport armored vehicles from Crimea into Kherson in the western tip of Kherson in the left bank of Dnipro River. And as I've mentioned in my previous video, the Russians have been utilizing this as kind of a massive playground for training soldiers, command centers. So losing these landing crafts is huge for them. And the other thing I want to mention as well is that the Russians, once they lose the Kerch Bridge, because I have no doubt that the Ukrainians will succeed in destroying the Kerch Bridge in the east of Crimea, the Russians will simply have to rely on every single landing craft they have to be able to transport armored vehicles, troops, supplies to Crimea and other areas in occupied territories in Ukraine. And by losing more and more of these landing crafts, this puts them in a very dire situation in which they will just simply not be able to hold on to Crimea and other areas long term. So I think this was a very strategic attack by Ukraine. And again, it shows that the Russians simply have no capacity to defend their ships. These unmanned sea vessels have really changed the game, and it has really cut the Russians with their pants down. And let me share with you a screenshot of this video that was released by the Ukrainian forces. And as you can see, this is right before this unmanned sea vessel hits the landing craft. It's a Sterna class landing craft and destroys it. And so one of them was also transporting a BTR-82 APC. So a lot of goodies that the Ukrainians managed to destroy. And as you guys can see, without them, Russia simply won't be able to hold on to Crimea long term, especially once they lose the Kerch Bridge. So really positive. The other positive thing out of Crimea today is that there's new news that came out from earlier in this month where a group of mobilized Russian soldiers beat up their colonel, and his name is Musurbekov. And it's kind of funny because Musor in Russian means trash. But anyways, they managed to beat him up, and eventually he died from his injuries in hospital. But what is interesting is that they changed into civilian clothes, these mobilized soldiers that killed their commander, and left their base in Simferopol to go back to Russia. So it looks like now I've been hearing more and more of these stories of Russian soldiers kind of rebelling against their commanders, their colonels. Again, it's anecdotal, so unless we see these types of stories repeating and reproducing, times 1,000 throughout the entire front line, again, this doesn't really mean much, but it shows that there are some Russian soldiers that are growing tough skin and are rebelling against their soldiers, right? Because we know that against their commanders, because we know that these commanders simply don't care about the lives of their soldiers. They're sending them to certain death, and they treat them like numbers. And they're worse than dogs, right? The Russians are, less of an asset for the Russian army than even armored vehicles. So I'm not surprised that this has occurred, but unless we see more of these stories happen, again, I don't think it's really going to have a big impact in the grand scheme of things. But it could be potentially the beginning of the end. Who knows? Maybe more and more of these stories are going to start coming out. I can only hope. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is two things. So first of all, in Orikhiv, essentially there's a new development. The Ukrainians in the east of Orikhiv, you can see in blue, Deep State updated this today. The Ukrainians managed to liberate a little bit more fields closer to Verbove. Again, these are fields. What is important for Ukraine is to take villages. As I've mentioned, it's the same tactic for the Russians. You're an open target in these open fields, obviously. So the Ukrainians need to be able to take villages to be able to, strengthen their positions and have better defenses. And so right now the goal is to obviously get to Novopokrovka, sorry, and Verbove. So in the eastern side, this is where Ukraine is trying to head for. Verbove would be the more important one because it's kind of in the middle of this Surovikin line. And you know that this is very tough. Right now, the distance between what Ukraine controls and the entrance of Verbove is only 3 kilometers, but you can bet that the Russians are doing everything possible to hold to that 3 kilometers. So it's going to be a lot of heavy fighting ongoing for the next few weeks, if not months. But Ukraine is going to get it done, and we're going to get to Verbove, and afterwards the Ukrainian forces will have pretty much breached halfway through in this direction through the Surovikin line. And the same thing is for Novoprokopivka. So that's a positive development, but yet again, these are just fields being taken. So unless the Ukrainians take villages, I don't see it as a very big deal so far. And the other good news is, again, the Russians are crying and they're panicking and they're being extremely anxious in the left bank of Dnieper River. They're mentioning that the Ukrainians are now flying helicopters, and of course they're flying them and hitting the Russian positions with unguided missiles, but also most likely transporting supplies and ammunition and Ukrainian troops to the left bank. So it really shows you how much confidence right now Ukraine has in really crossing the river. And again, what they're trying to work for, as I've mentioned in yesterday's video, is that the Ukrainians are building or trying to build eventually a safe passage to transport hundreds of vehicles, build those pontoon bridges from the right bank to the left bank to start having breakthroughs in Kherson. And again, for them, if they manage to have a breakthrough here, it cuts, the road in half towards Crimea and really blocking this road, this connection between Crimea and Ukraine. So this would be catastrophic, and this would be the beginning of the end for Putin. And especially if Ukraine manages, they will destroy the Kerch Bridge. Crimea is going to be pretty much isolated, and the Russians will have no choice but to eventually retreat and give up Crimea. So things are slowly forming. The Ukrainians are slowly chipping away these opportunities, but they're going to get it done. In 2024, I see it as I see it as a very positive year for Ukraine. I can really see, in the grand scheme of things, how this can develop into a massive breakthrough for the Ukrainian forces. So that's the video for today, guys. Let me know what you guys think about my comments, about what I said about the landing craft. And thank you again for your support. I really appreciate it. If you enjoy my content, please subscribe to my channel, like my video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thank you, and Slava Ukraini!